3 agonizing hours, a dozen terrified financial engineers, gallons of cold sweat, and $100 million in untraceable capital teetering on the brink of being permanently frozen. Inside the private penthouse command center of the Jae-Hoon syndicate, the air was thick as blood. Error alerts flashed across the main screen like arterial spray, and cascading red digits bled down the LED monitors like a wound that refused to clot. Just when the Don's lieutenant reached for the weapon concealed beneath his jacket, the door hissed open. A woman in a crisp blue janitorial uniform stepped in, a mop gripped in her right hand, one white earbud subtly tucked behind her ear. She glanced up at the whiteboard, her eyes narrowing as if she'd just spotted a crack no one else could see. This was Nova Reed, the night shift cleaner for the building. And in the next 60 seconds, she would do what the Don's million-dollar strategists could not. Stabilize the entire system with nothing but a black marker and a few strokes of brilliance. What she didn't know was that against the shadowed wall near the window, Lee Min-joon, the coldest eye in Seoul's underworld, had been standing there all along, watching her every move. And what he was about to do next would change both their fates forever. The sound of a marker cap snapping off cut through the suffocating silence, sharp as a blade sliding free. Lee Min-joon, early 30s, stood motionless in the corner of the darkened room, his body framed by the red and gold glow of emergency lighting. His tailored black suit was immaculate, his jawline sharp as a threat, and his eyes, cold, unblinking, lethal, tracked Nova's every movement across the whiteboard. Around the long obsidian conference table, his financial engineers sat frozen, their faces pale as ghosts, laptops still open, fingers hovering uselessly over keyboards. The air smelled of fear and expensive cologne. And in the center of it all, completely unaware of the dozen loaded weapons in the room, Nova Reed calmly sketched a modified Kalman filter variable onto the board, her marker moving with the quiet confidence of someone who'd solved impossible equations 1,000 times before. The Don's lips curved barely. Not quite a smile. Just the faint hint of something far more dangerous. Interest. Nova's hand moved without hesitation, the black marker flowing across the whiteboard in smooth, deliberate strokes. She didn't ask permission, didn't announce herself. She simply corrected the equation the way someone might straighten a crooked picture frame. Instinctively, because the flaw was unbearable. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind. 6 years old, asleep 3 miles away in their cramped studio apartment, protected only by a deadbolt and Nova's ability to remain invisible. That invisibility was everything. It kept food on the table. It kept questions unasked. It kept the past buried where it belonged. She'd been Novachin once. Elite cryptographer. DoD clearance. A mind sharp enough to crack systems governments spent billions protecting. Then came the betrayal. Her mentor, her lover. Her entire life dismantled in a single night of lies and federal raids. She'd walked away from that world with nothing but her daughter and a new last name. Reed. Plain. Forgettable. The janitorial uniform was her camouflage. The mop, her cover. No one looked twice at the woman who emptied trash cans and mopped floors. No one suspected that behind her tired eyes lived algorithms most PhD graduates couldn't comprehend. But tonight, standing before that whiteboard, watching the nonlinear function bleed errors like a severed artery, her instincts overpowered her caution. The flaw was elegant in its lethality, a cascading feedback loop designed to implode the moment anyone tried to unlock the capital. Whoever built the attack knew exactly what they were doing. She adjusted the Kalman gain variable, compensated for the temporal lag, then added a corrective function that would stabilize the oscillation. 3 strokes. 4. The marker squeaked softly against the glass. Behind her, someone sucked in a breath. One of the engineers lunged forward, fingers flying across his keyboard, feeding her correction into the live system. The room held its breath. The error alert stuttered, flickered. Then, one by one, they blinked green. The cascading red digits froze mid-fall, reversed, and snapped back into orderly columns. The lock mechanism disengaged with a soft chime that sounded, in that suffocating silence, like church bells. $100 million freed. Nova capped the marker, set it on the tray, and turned toward the door. Her shift wasn't over. She still had 4 floors to clean. She made it 2 steps before the voice stopped her cold. "Who are you?" It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The voice carried the weight of absolute authority, wrapped in silk and edged in steel. Nova's spine stiffened. She didn't turn around. Not yet. She knew instinctively that the man who'd just spoken was the most dangerous person she'd ever encountered. Lee Min-joon stepped out of the shadows, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. The room seemed to contract around him, the engineers shrinking back as if pulled by gravitational force. He moved with the unhurried grace of a predator that had never known fear, his eyes fixed on Nova with the intensity of a man dissecting a puzzle. "I asked you a question," he said, his accent precise, his tone flat. "Who are you?" Nova turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral, her hands loose at her sides. "Nova Reed. Night shift janitorial services." "No." Lee Min-joon's head tilted fractionally, his gaze sharpening. "That's what you do, not who you are." The silence stretched, taut as a tripwire. Then he turned to the man seated closest to the whiteboard, a lean, middle-aged Korean man in wire-rimmed glasses and a charcoal suit. On, the lead strategist. The man whose algorithms had just failed spectacularly. "Run her correction," Lee Min-joon said. On's jaw tightened. "Dawn, we don't know." "Run it." The command was soft. Final. On's fingers moved reluctantly across his keyboard, pulling up diagnostic layers, stress-testing the modification, cross-referencing it against the attack parameters. His expression shifted from suspicion to confusion to something approaching horror. "It's flawless," On whispered. "The feedback loop is neutralized. The capital is stabilized. Completely." Lee Min-joon's eyes never left Nova. He crossed the room in 3 strides, reached behind one of the chairs, and pulled out a tailored black blazer. He threw it to her. She caught it reflexively, the fabric expensive and foreign against her rough, cleaning chemical-dried hands. "You are no longer cleaning floors," Lee Min-joon said, his voice quiet as an execution order. "You are my consultant. You will fix what they cannot. You will stay until I say otherwise." He stepped closer. Close enough that Nova could see the faint scar along his jawline, the absolute absence of warmth in his eyes. "Failure," he added almost gently, "means death." Then he walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers, and disappeared through the side door without looking back. Nova stood frozen, the blazer heavy in her hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, On stared at the whiteboard with the expression of a man who'd just watched his empire crack. Nova had $300 in her bank account, a daughter who needed breakfast in 6 hours, and she'd just been drafted into a world where brilliance was currency and mistakes were paid for in blood. She thought of her daughter's smile, her tiny hands, the way she said "mommy" when Nova tucked her in. She slipped the blazer on. It fit perfectly. The obsidian conference table stretched before her like a judgment bench, its surface polished to a mirror shine that reflected the cold LED lights overhead. Nova sat at the far edge, still wearing her janitorial uniform beneath the tailored black blazer, the fabric a strange, suffocating reminder that her life had been rewritten in the span of 60 seconds. Around the table sat 7 men in suits that cost more than her annual rent. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to contempt, but all of them kept their eyes on Lee Min-joon, who sat at the head of the table with the stillness of a loaded weapon. He hadn't spoken since they'd assembled. He simply watched Nova with that unnerving, dissecting gaze, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Finally, he leaned back, his voice quiet and deliberate. "Wisdom is better than strength," he said, the words hanging in the air like a benediction and a warning. "Yet the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard." Nova recognized the reference immediately. Ecclesiastes 9 verse 16. A verse about the world's cruelty toward brilliance wrapped in the wrong skin. Lee Min-joon's lips curved fractionally. "Let us see if that remains true here." On, seated 2 chairs to Lee Min-joon's right, leaned forward, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. His expression was carved from ice and wounded pride. "With respect, Don," On said, his tone dripping polite venom, "this is not a janitor's closet. The algorithms we manage require years of institutional knowledge, advanced degrees, and security clearance we cannot possibly extend to. A woman who solved in 30 seconds what you failed to solve in 3 hours." Lee Min-joon's voice was silk over razors. On's jaw clenched. He turned his cold gaze on Nova. "One correction does not make her qualified. We are managing high-frequency trades across 14 currencies, algorithmic hedging protocols, and nonlinear derivatives. This requires expertise, not intuition." The other men nodded subtly. Nova felt the weight of their dismissal, like a hand pressing against her chest. Lee Min-joon gestured toward her. "Explain." Nova swallowed. Every instinct screamed at her to stay small, stay invisible, stay safe. But her daughter's face appeared in her mind. Hungry, trusting, dependent. She cleared her throat. "Imagine your sink is clogged," she said quietly. An blinked. "Excuse me." "Your kitchen sink," Nova continued, her voice steadying. "You pour water in, but it backs up. Fills the basin. Starts overflowing. You call a plumber with all the credentials, all the tools. He takes apart the pipes, replaces the fittings, recalibrates the pressure. But the sink still won't drain." The room was silent. "Then someone else walks in," Nova said, looks under the sink, and pulls a clump of hair out of the trap. Water flows. Problem solved. She looked directly at An. "Your Kalman filter wasn't broken. It was just clogged. You were so focused on the complexity of the system, you missed the simple blockage. Your gain variable was reacting to corrupted temporal data. I didn't replace your system. I just cleared the trap." An's face flushed. One of the other strategists coughed to hide a laugh. Lee Min-joon's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement. Approval. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise, measured movements. "She stays," he said. And with that, he walked out, leaving Nova alone at the table with 6 men who now looked at her with something far more dangerous than contempt. They looked at her with fear. The black sedan that picked Nova up the next morning didn't ask for her address. It already knew. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his knuckles, didn't speak. He simply opened the door, waited for her to climb in, and drove her to the building in silence. She'd barely slept. Her daughter, Mia, had woken twice with nightmares, and Nova had held her in the dark, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. When dawn finally came, she'd called her neighbor, Mrs. Chu, a grandmother who asked no questions, and paid her $200 to watch Mia for the week. Now, walking through the lobby in clothes that didn't quite fit the marble floors and vaulted ceilings, Nova felt the weight of eyes on her. The security guards, the receptionists, the other employees who stepped aside as she passed, their whispers trailing behind her like smoke. "That's her. The cleaner. Dawn relies on her now." The word Dawn was never spoken loudly. It was exhaled, breathed, feared. By the 3rd day, Nova had a desk. Not in the strategy wing, where An and his team worked behind frosted glass and biometric locks, but in a small office adjacent to Lee Min-joon's private suite. The room had no windows. Just a computer terminal, a whiteboard, and a camera in the corner that she knew was always watching. She didn't mind the surveillance. What unnerved her was the man standing outside her door at all hours. One of Lee Min-joon's guards, stone-faced and armed, his presence a constant reminder that she was no longer invisible. She was protected. And protection, in this world, was just another word for captivity. On the 4th night, as Nova was running probability models on a new hedging algorithm, her terminal went black. She froze. The screen flickered, then displayed a single line of text. "Access denied. Security breach reported. ****. Her pulse spiked. She tried to reboot. Nothing. Tried her credentials. Locked out. The door behind her opened. An stepped in, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes glittered with satisfaction. "A shame," he said softly. "It seems your access has been flagged for suspicious activity. Protocol dictates an immediate lockout until the Dawn's security team investigates." Nova's stomach dropped. She knew exactly what this was. Sabotage. Elegant. Deniable. "I didn't." "Of course you didn't," An interrupted smoothly. "But the logs will show otherwise. And the Dawn does not tolerate breaches. Even from consultants." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Wisdom is better than strength," he said, echoing Lee Min-joon's earlier words. "But only if you survive long enough to use it." The door closed. Nova sat alone in the dark, her hands trembling, her mind racing. Then her phone buzzed. A single text. Unknown number. Rooftop. Now. She took the elevator up, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The rooftop was empty except for one figure silhouetted against the Seoul skyline. Lee Min-joon, his coat billowing slightly in the wind, his back to her. He didn't turn as she approached. "I know everything that happens in my house." The silence stretched. Finally he turned, his eyes unreadable. "Your daughter," he said. "Mia. 6 years old. Attends Sunshine Primary. Allergic to peanuts. Her favorite color is yellow." Nova's blood turned to ice. "You have enemies now," Lee Min-joon continued, his voice soft, almost gentle. On is not a man who forgives humiliation. And there are others, rivals, competitors, who would love to see me weakened. They will find your daughter. They will use her. He stepped closer. Unless I protect her. Nova's throat tightened. What do you want? Absolute loyalty, Lee Min-joon said. Absolute performance. You do not question. You do not hesitate. You solve what I need solved when I need it solved. And if I refuse? His expression didn't change. Then you are simply a night shift janitor again. Invisible. Unprotected. Alone. He reached into his coat and pulled out a phone, new encrypted. This is how you reach me. Only me. Your daughter will have a security detail by morning. Invisible, but present. She will be safer than the president's children. He held the phone out. Nova stared at it, her mind screaming, her heart breaking. Then she thought of Mia's smile. Her tiny hand in hers. The way she said, I love you, Mommy, every single night. Nova took the phone. Lee Min-joon nodded once, then walked past her toward the elevator. Good, he said without looking back. Because tomorrow the real work begins. The elevator doors closed, and Nova stood alone on the rooftop, the city sprawling beneath her like a glittering cage, the encrypted phone heavy in her hand. She'd sold her invisibility for her daughter's safety, and she knew with cold certainty there was no going back. Most people scroll past stories like this without a second thought. But you're still here. That means something. If you felt that gut punch moment when everything changes and there's no reverse gear, subscribe. This community is built on people who understand that some stories aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors. And we're just getting started. The alert came at 4:47 a.m., 3 weeks into Nova's new life. Her encrypted phone buzzed against the nightstand, the screen glowing red. She grabbed it, her daughter still asleep beside her. Tiny fists curled against the pillow. Market incident. Command center. Now. By the time she arrived, the room was already in chaos. Screens flashed amber warnings, and the team of engineers clustered around on, their voices low and urgent. Lee Min-joon stood near the window, his silhouette sharp against the dawn light breaking over the city. He didn't acknowledge her arrival. He didn't need to. Localized attack, On said, his voice clipped and professional. Hong Kong derivatives market. Someone triggered a microburst sell-off targeting our positions. Small but coordinated. Nova moved to the main terminal, her fingers already flying across the keys, pulling up the transaction data. The pattern was unmistakable, a probe, testing her counter protocol, searching for weaknesses. Your system held. On continued, turning toward Lee Min-joon. Barely, but this is the third probe this month. Each one more aggressive. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Her worth is unverified, Don. We are trusting our entire infrastructure to someone with no credentials. No institutional oversight, no. Enough. Lee Min-joon's voice was quiet. Lethal. But On pressed forward, his desperation showing through the cracks in his composure. We risk everything on the instincts of a woman we pulled off the cleaning crew. If her protocol fails during a real assault, we lose more than money. We lose reputation. We lose fear. We lose control. The room went silent. Lee Min-joon turned slowly, his gaze landing on with the weight of a death sentence. I only care, he said, each word deliberate and cold, if the money moves. He stepped closer to On, his presence suffocating. And it moves better now. On's face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw working soundlessly. Lee Min-joon's eyes flicked to Nova. Secure the protocol, he said. Make it unbreakable. Then he walked out, leaving On standing there, humiliated and seething, his hands trembling at his sides. Nova felt the man's hatred like heat from a furnace. But she returned to her terminal, her fingers steady, her mind already 3 moves ahead. Because in this world, survival wasn't about being liked. It was about being irreplaceable. The black helicopter touched down on a private helipad 40 miles outside Seoul, surrounded by forests so dense it swallowed sound. Nova stepped out, the rotor wash whipping her hair across her face, her heart hammering as 2 guards motioned her toward a structure hidden among the trees. A modernist glass cube that seemed to float above the landscape, its edges sharp as a threat. Lee Min-joon waited inside, standing before a wall of windows that overlooked a valley shrouded in mist. He'd removed his jacket, his white dress shirt rolled to the elbows, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost human. Almost. No surveillance here. he said without turning. No guards inside. No recording devices. What we say stays between us. Nova stepped closer, cautious, her instincts still screaming that every word in this man's presence was a test. Why am I here? Lee Min-joon finally turned, his expression unreadable. Because I need you to understand what you're protecting. He gestured to the table between them, where a tablet displayed a network map, sprawling, interconnected, terrifying in its complexity. Names, locations, financial institutions, government officials. The Jae-Hoon syndicate controls $4.7 billion in assets across 17 countries, he said quietly. We are not criminals playing at power. We are the architecture beneath the architecture. We move markets. We destabilize governments. We decide who rises and who falls. His voice was calm, factual, but his eyes betrayed something else. Exhaustion. The weight of an empire built on razor wire. And every single day, he continued, someone tries to kill me. Rivals, governments, former allies. I have survived 23 assassination attempts. I sleep 3 hours a night. I trust no one. He paused, his gaze locking onto hers. Until you. Nova's breath caught. You didn't ask for power, Lee Min-joon said. You didn't negotiate. You didn't posture. You simply solved the problem because the flaw offended you. That kind of purity is rarer than diamonds in my world. He sat, motioning for her to do the same. Tell me why you were cleaning floors. Nova hesitated. The past was a wound she'd spent 6 years trying to close. But something in his voice, not kindness but recognition, made her speak. I was a cryptographer, she said quietly. DoD contracts. Classified systems. I was good. Maybe the best. Her hands clenched. My mentor. The man I loved. He sold secrets to a foreign intelligence agency and framed me for it. By the time I proved my innocence, my career was ashes. My reputation destroyed. I had a 3-month-old daughter and $26. Her voice didn't shake. It had happened too long ago for tears. So I disappeared. Changed my name. Took the only job no one looks twice at. Lee Min-joon was silent for a long moment. He stole your genius, he said finally. And the world let him. Nova nodded. I know what that feels like, Lee Min-joon said, his voice soft as a knife drawn across silk. To be punished for someone else's betrayal. To survive only by becoming invisible. He leaned forward. I was 12 when my father was executed by his own lieutenants. They sold him out to a rival syndicate, took his territory, and threw me into the streets. I survived by being smarter, faster, more ruthless. I rebuilt this empire from dirt and blood, and I will die before I let anyone take it from me again. Or walk away. I will erase your involvement. You'll be invisible again. Safe. Forgotten. Nova looked at him, this man who controlled billions but trusted no one, who'd survived assassination attempts but couldn't sleep, who recognized her worth because he'd been underestimated just like her. I'm staying, she said. Lee Min-joon's expression didn't change, but something passed between them. An unspoken pact, fragile and dangerous. Good, he said. Because the war is just beginning. The intelligence arrived during a rainstorm. The kind that turned Seoul's streets into rivers and made the city feel like it was drowning. Lee Min-joon's phone lit up simultaneously with 6 others around the command center table, each one displaying the same encrypted message. Nova watched his expression shift, subtle, but unmistakable. This was fear. They're moving, he said quietly, turning the phone toward his security chief. 72 hours. Full-scale coordinated assault across all our primary positions. The room erupted into controlled chaos, voices overlapping as strategists pulled up market models and risk assessments. On stood near the door, his face pale, his hands gripping a tablet like a lifeline. Nova moved to the main screen, her mind already racing through scenarios. She pulled up the current defensive protocol, the one she'd built over the past month, tested and retested. It was solid, conservative, designed to absorb attacks and minimize damage. It wouldn't be enough. We need to shift to a counteroffensive posture, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The room went silent. On stepped forward, his expression a mixture of disbelief and barely concealed contempt. Absolutely not. Our protocol is designed for defense, not aggression. If we expose our positions offensively and fail, we lose everything anyway, Nova interrupted, turning to face him. They're not probing anymore. This is a kill shot. If we sit back and defend, they'll overwhelm us through sheer volume. We need to strike first. Disrupt their coordination before they synchronize. She pulled up a new model on the screen, her fingers flying across the interface. We create a mirror algorithm. Make them think we're vulnerable in sectors we've already secured, bait them into overcommitting, then collapse their positions simultaneously. It's aggressive. It's risky, but it's mathematically sound. On's jaw tightened. It's suicide. You're proposing we expose $600 million in capital on an untested theory. Dawn, this is exactly what I warned you about. She's brilliant, I'll grant her that, but brilliance without institutional discipline is just recklessness. The engineers around the table shifted uncomfortably, their eyes moving between Nova and Lee Min-joon. The Don stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the screen, on Nova's model, on the probability matrices flowing across the display. His expression was carved from stone, but his mind, Nova could see it, was calculating every angle, every risk, every potential outcome. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet and absolute. Begin the protocol. On's face went white. Dawn, you're dismissed, On. The words landed like a guillotine blade. On stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, his entire world collapsing in the span of 2 seconds. Then slowly he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Lee Min-joon's eyes never left the screen. You have 72 hours, he said to Nova. Make it perfect. Nova nodded, her hands already moving, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Because in 72 hours, she'd either save an empire or destroy it. And there was no middle ground. The assault began at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday. The markets in flux, liquidity high, defenses spread thin. The main screen erupted in red. Sell orders cascading across 14 sectors simultaneously, each one precisely calibrated to trigger maximum damage. Nova stood at the center of the command center, a headset over her ears, 3 monitors arrayed before her. Her fingers moving across the keyboard with the controlled precision of a surgeon in an operating theater. Around her, engineers shouted coordinates, risk assessments, probability updates. The air tasted like electricity and fear. Lee Min-joon stood behind her, silent, his presence a constant weight on her shoulders. They're hitting commodities first. One of the analysts called out. Gold, lithium, rare earth. Let them, Nova said, her voice steady. That's the bait. Hold positions. Don't react. The red intensified, bleeding across the screen like a hemorrhage. 50 million, 70 million, 90 million in positions under siege. Nova, the analyst's voice cracked. Hold. Her eyes tracked the patterns, the timing, the mathematical signature beneath the chaos. She'd studied this rival organization for weeks, mapped their strategies, identified their rhythm. They were methodical, aggressive, predictable. Synchronization point in 15 seconds, she said quietly. The room held its breath. Nova's fingers hovered over the enter key. 10 seconds. The screens pulsed red, warnings screaming across every monitor. 5. Lee Min-joon's hand rested on the back of her chair, his knuckles white. 3. 2. Nova slammed the enter key. The counter protocol deployed like a virus, invisible and instant, slipping into the rivals' attack vectors and rewriting the logic from within. Their sell orders stuttered, hiccuped, then reversed. Their exposed positions, left vulnerable in their overcommitment, became targets. Nova's second algorithm struck like a surgical blade, collapsing their leveraged derivatives, isolating their capital, capturing transaction metadata in real time. The red screen flickered, stuttered. Then, section by section, it turned green. The rivals' assault didn't just fail. It imploded. Their positions liquidated, their capital frozen, their entire operational structure exposed and logged. The command center erupted in shouts, engineers throwing their fists in the air, analysts collapsing back in their chairs, their faces slick with sweat. But Nova just sat there, staring at the screen, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. Lee Min-joon leaned down, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You didn't just defend us, he said quietly. You destroyed them. Nova pulled off her headset, her ears ringing, her vision blurring at the edges. Good, she whispered. Because mercy, she'd learned, was a luxury neither of them could afford. The rooftop was quiet, the city sprawling beneath them like a constellation of captured stars. Nova stood at the edge, the wind tugging at her hair, the cold biting through her jacket. Lee Min-joon stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "On is gone," he said quietly. Nova turned. Gone. Disappeared. Permanently. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Nova's stomach twisted, but she didn't look away. He was a liability. Lee Min-joon continued, his voice calm, factual. Brilliant but arrogant. Loyal, but only to his own vision. Men like that are useful until they become dangerous. He turned to face her. "I've dissolved the old advisory structure. The financial strategy division now answers directly to me. Through you." Nova's breath caught. "I'm offering you the position of chief strategist. My consigliera. You will have access to every asset, every system, every piece of intelligence we control. You will be the second most powerful person in this organization." He stepped closer. "Your daughter will live in a secured residence. Private school. Armed security. A trust fund that will ensure her safety and comfort for the rest of her life. You will have wealth beyond anything you imagined. Power that makes governments nervous." His eyes locked onto hers. "But you will also have enemies. Rivals who will want you dead. Allies who will test your loyalty. And pressure that never, ever stops." Nova looked out over the city, her mind churning. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible. Forgotten. Cleaning floors to survive. Now she stood at the precipice of power, one decision away from security or annihilation. She thought of Mia. Her smile. Her future. "I accept," Nova said. Lee Min-joon nodded slowly, something like satisfaction crossing his features. "Good. Because wisdom without strength dies young. But wisdom with power." He paused. "That changes empires." He extended his hand. Nova shook it, his grip firm, the pact sealed. "Welcome to the empire, Consigliere Reed." And as the city glittered below them, Nova realized she'd finally stopped running. Not because she was safe, but because she'd become the thing people ran from. She was no longer invisible. She was inevitable. You made it to the end. Most people don't. They scroll, consume, forget. But you stayed. You saw Nova's transformation from invisible to inevitable. If that resonates, if you know what it's like to be underestimated, dismissed, or forced to hide your brilliance, don't just vanish. Subscribe. This community isn't built on passive spectators. It's built on people who recognize power when they see it. And we're just getting started. The question is, are you in or are you out?